Do you ever feel like your conversations with your spouse go from playful and interesting to tense and offensive so fast that you feel like you just got in a car crash? How do you navigate these surprising conflicts without yelling or shutting down? Welcome to the Christian Marriage Podcast, the only podcast on the entire internet about Christian marriage that I host. Today on the Christian Marriage Podcast, I am beginning a new series called Inside Marriage, where I take you inside my marriage. Can you tell that I'm super creative with these names? You know what the hardest part about marriage often is? It's that you never know if you're doing it right. Often you're just alone in your thoughts, trying to make it up as you go along. No playbook, no plan, no feedback. Except for your spouse. Your spouse is usually pretty open to giving you feedback. The point is that when you're stuck, you just feel so stuck. Well, turns out that stuck is just a state of mind and that there is actually plenty of help out there, like this podcast. The goal of this entire podcast is to help your marriage by giving you perspectives that you can learn from. Part of what I've noticed in the interviews that I've done with couples so far is that we don't get quite as granular and practical as I think sometimes people need. And I think that these interviews are super helpful and they're super encouraging, and they form such an important foundation for everything that the practical would be built on. So I'm definitely going to keep doing those. But I want to get more boots on the ground, hands in the dirt, face in the pie type of practical. Or at least that's how I eat pie. To be honest, Thanksgiving is get a little awkward, but you do what you got to do. It's pie. So in Inside Marriage, I will walk you through interactions between me and my wife and show you how I navigated them either well or poorly. Now, I think Sandy and I have a good marriage, but it's not always an easy marriage. We have had to learn how to navigate conflict well, and we still need to navigate conflict well. My hope is that you will be able to learn from my perspective and the way that I navigate my world and my feelings so that you will be able to navigate your perspective and your feelings in the middle of conflict. Now, one note about this series, kind of building off of that, is that in Inside Marriage, I will be sharing the interaction completely from my perspective alone. I will not be sharing anything about Sandy's perspective. Now, this is because that her perspective is completely useless and always wrong. That's a joke. The actual reason is that when you are in conflict with your spouse, your perspective is the only one that you have to interact with. And you have to figure out how to navigate the conflict from your perspective. So, one of the most helpful things that you can do for your marriage is figure out how you can manage and control and direct your perspective in a way that builds up and that helps deliver you through that conflict. So, I'm going to be sharing things completely and only from my perspective as I try and manage my internal world when we are in conflict. So what I'm going to do is share an interaction with you, then share some principles at the end. So let's go inside marriage. Now, once upon a time, I was telling Sandy that my knees were aching because one thing that nobody told you about adulthood is that everything is terrible. She said, well, why don't you go to the doctor? So right there, I already started feeling a little defensive. But I also realized something in the moment and that I was curious about. I realized that I did not feel optimistic about going to the doctor. My feeling was that the doctor would not be helpful. That was my assumption. Going to the doctor would not be helpful. But it seemed that Sandy's feeling and her instinct is that going to the doctor would be helpful. I realized that we had different instincts. Now, I get excited to learn things about myself and about us as a couple. So I wanted to compare these different instincts. So I asked her, do you go to the doctor and leave thinking that was a helpful experience? Now, when I asked that, I was feeling mostly curious about what her experience actually was. And to be fair, I was also probably still feeling a little defensive. But I honestly think I was mostly curious. She said, yes, I have. I said to her, probably with like an excited, raised tone, because I was learning about this kind of unconscious perspective that I had. I told her that her experiences had led her to believe that doctors were helpful, and my experiences had apparently led me to believe that doctors were in general not helpful. And I was feeling pretty excited about that. I was learning something about myself. This interaction was fun for me. Then she said, do you think that was helpful for you to share with me? Car crash, right? When we had gone from fun and exciting to a conflict in the matter of one sentence, from my perspective. Somehow she had gotten offended and I had no idea how. All of a sudden, I was feeling offended and defensive. I shared something I was excited about, something I was learning about myself with my wife, and I felt like I was getting ridiculed or called stupid for doing it. I became immediately exasperated at how ridiculous and closed-minded she was. Now, as an aside, looking back on it, I can understand that my excited, raised tone probably led her to feel like I was attacking her. But in the moment, I was just kind of having fun in an interesting conversation, and then car crash. Okay, back to the story. So after she said, do you think that was helpful for you to share with me? I said, with all of the bitterness and defensiveness and blame that I could muster, while still convincing myself that I was calm and properly toned, I said, well, I guess that depends on how you choose to receive it. It was an attack and an attempt to blame her for this car crash that we were in. So we had some quiet moments after that. And during these moments, I knew that I had attacked her. And I knew that I needed to reach out to her to repair the damage that my attack had done. So what I chose to do was clarify my position. And for a little background for you, I have this kind of working theory that Sandy takes things very personally, very quickly. So when I can, I need to let her know that what I am saying and what I'm doing is not about her. So that's what I tried. I told her that I was talking about myself and was not at all commenting on what she thought or what she felt or the rightness or wrongness of her instinct. And I promised her that I was talking about myself and not her. And thankfully, she chose to receive that, and I think she chose to believe me, more or less. She went on to say, When I say something and you respond with roar, roar loud, it's hard not to take it personally. So then I thought that we were onto something because she had apparently indeed taken it personally and thought that I was attacking her. And then we were able to talk through it. I was able to reassure her that I was indeed talking about myself and not about her. And to her credit, she chose to believe me. And from there, we moved on. The relationship was repaired. So, a couple of principles that really stuck out to me about this interaction that helped us get through to the place where we could just move on. By the way, I would say not just move on, but move on in partnership. That's a very important qualification. We were able to move on in partnership. So, a couple principles that helped us to move on in partnership. First was ownership. Whenever I was feeling offended and attacked and called stupid, I chose to forgive her attack and focus on repairing my attack. I see a lot of couples get derailed here. Some people will focus on their spouse's role and ruminate on what their spouse should have done better or could have done better. That is simply unhelpful. Instead, ask yourself constantly, force yourself to ask yourself what you could have done better and what you can apologize for. The second principle that stuck out was clarify your intent. Let your spouse know why you said or did something so that they don't have to guess why. This is helpful because in the face of uncertainty, we often assume the worst in an attempt to feel safe, to feel personally safe. So, by clarifying your intent, you cut down on a sense of uncertainty and help your spouse to be able to focus on you instead of on their emotional safety. Now, what I could have done better was instead of clarifying my position immediately, I could have found something to apologize for first and then asked her permission to clarify my position. So that's what I would have done in that conflict. I think we handled it pretty well. I'd give it like a 8 out of 10 probably. There was a conflict, we made a repair, and then we moved on in partnership. It's pretty good. Here are some questions that I have for you. I have 3 questions that I want you to let me know in the comments what stuck out to you. Number 1, what principle, A, ownership and owning your part, or B, clarifying your intent, clarifying your position, A or B, what principle do you think that you can take from this episode and start implementing into your marriage and into your conflicts right now? A or B? What questions do you have about those principles? I would love to know what questions you have so that I can answer them and help. Okay, second question. Do you assume that doctors are helpful? Because I was honestly surprised at how deeply I assumed that they were not helpful. There's definitely some like stuff from my family of origin back there or something. I don't know what it was, but I was honestly surprised. Do you assume that doctors are helpful, or do you kind of assume that they're not going to be helpful if you went to them? And then thirdly, what do you think about this series? So this is an example of kind of what we're going to talk about here. Was this helpful? Did you find it interesting? What suggestions would you have to help me make it better? So thank you for being here. I hope this was helpful, and I hope that you will be able to take this episode and build a life-giving marriage for you and your spouse.